In October 2024, a group of international climate scientists handed in a letter to the Nordic Council of Ministers. The subject: the serious risk of a major ocean circulation change in the Atlantic, a prospect which has been vastly underestimated according to a string of scientific studies. Professor Stefan Rahmstorf was one of those scientists, a leading voice on the subject of the Atlantic overturning circulation, also known as the AMOC. Stefan is the Professor of Physics of the Oceans at the University of Potsdam. He heads the Earth System Analysis Department at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, or PIC, in Germany, and joins us today as the newest member of the CCAG. Today, I'll be chatting to him about his research and the implications of a changing AMOC. As a climate justice campaigner who focuses on the transition away from fossil fuels, this is an area of climate science that deeply interests me, yet is one that does not get nearly enough airtime. In this conversation, we hope to shed light on the current issue and what needs to be done. So, Stefan, as an introduction for our viewers today, can you please share a short explanation of what the AMOC is and why it's important?
Yes, sure. Hi, Tori. I've been working on the AMOC since 1991, actually, and the AMOC is a big vertical overturning circulation going along the full length of the Atlantic from the Southern Ocean, from the tip of South Africa, right up to Norway, basically. And it consists of relatively warm surface waters flowing north, giving off their heat in the high latitudes, mid to high latitudes of the North Atlantic, thereby getting colder and denser and sinking down to between 2,000 and 3,000 meters depth, where this overturning circulation returns as a deep current, so-called North Atlantic deep water, to the south. And it transports more heat to the north than 50 times the total energy use of humanity. Wow. And is the main reason why the northern hemisphere is about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius warmer than the southern hemisphere.
And as a result of that warm air that we receive, what would be the impacts of a change to the AMOC? And could you tell us a little bit more about how this could both impact the environment and society?
Well, yeah, let me maybe first mention that there is indeed concern that this ocean circulation could change, because as soon as I started researching that in 1991, I got a lot of interest in my research from the paleoclimatologists that study natural climate changes in Earth history in the past, and using, for example, ice core data from Greenland and Antarctica, and sediment data and other sources, which allow us to reconstruct past climate changes. And one thing that is really striking when you look at past climate changes over the last few million years or so is that the biggest change and most abrupt change always occurs around the Northern Atlantic. So the North Atlantic is clearly, something is very unstable there, causing very big and abrupt regional climate changes. And that actually already led paleoclimatologists like Wally Broker, a famous US paleoclimatologist, to warn about unpleasant surprises in the greenhouse, arguing that in the past we see that climate hasn't changed gradually and smoothly, but rather it has done some abrupt jumps, etc. And this could happen again. And so that is the concern. And the effects we can already see in the paleoclimate record, for example, in the Greenland ice cores, where there are sudden jumps in temperature of something like 10 degrees Celsius within a decade, etc. And if the AMOC were to shut down, then if nothing else happened, if it was just the same climate but without AMOC, we would get the high northern latitudes, say off the coast of Norway, for example, in that area, in winter like 20 degrees Celsius colder than now. And that's on average, right? So over many years averaged. So that just shows you what a tremendous impact on the regional temperature around the northern Atlantic this AMOC has. But we also see other things in paleoclimate, for example, major shifts in tropical rainfall belts. When the AMOC shuts down, the tropical rainfall belts move to the south because they always arise where the warm air rises up in the atmosphere. This is always what triggers rainfall. And right now it is happening north of the equator because it happens where the air is warmest. And because the northern hemisphere is now warmer than the southern hemisphere, the tropical rainfall is north of the equator. But if we shut down the AMOC, the northern hemisphere won't be warmer than the southern hemisphere anymore. And the tropical rainfall belts shift south onto the equator. And this kind of thing that has had massive impacts in Earth history. And it would also, if this happened again in the future, because the whole ecosystems and also now human infrastructure is adapted to the climate that we have had in the past centuries. And so we have the rainforests where the tropical rainfall belts are. If they shift away, the rainforest won't get enough rain anymore. And suddenly areas that are not used to extreme rainfall will get far too much rainfall to cope. And so this is just one of the reasons why a change in AMOC can have many impacts around the world. There is more. We can come to that later, perhaps.
Yes, for sure. And I remember hearing about the AMOC and how if it collapses, it means that where I live here in the UK will experience more sort of Arctic-like temperatures, which to me conveys that this is obviously a very serious issue, but it doesn't seem to be getting nearly enough attention that it deserves. And I have yet to see it be spoken about in sort of mainstream media. And I was wondering, why do you think this is? Why aren't people talking about the AMOC enough?
Well, some people argue people are talking too much about it. I don't have this opinion. I'm not sure what interests the media and why and what not. But as a matter of fact, when I started in the 90s, it got quite a bit of media coverage. Then there was this film by Roland Emmerich, The Day After Tomorrow, a Hollywood disaster movie that was kind of focused on this AMOC collapse issue. And there was a lot of media attention back then. Even the Pentagon put out a report thinking the unthinkable about the risk of an AMOC collapse and what that would mean. So there, over the years, I have seen interest in this topic coming and going. And it also, in the past, it has often been really exaggerated, like newspapers writing, we are predicting a new ice age and stuff like that. And we have never predicted that AMOC shutdown. It has always been considered a low probability but high impact risk. I used to say the probability is a single-digit percentage. And also, certainly, even if that were to happen, it wouldn't be an ice age. An ice age is something completely different when huge ice sheets are growing on Earth. But this would be just a regional cooling. But it would still be extremely impactful. And so, I don't know, some people argue we should focus on the certain impacts of climate change, like increase in extreme heat, in extreme rainfall events, in drought, in stronger hurricanes. This is all already happening now, and it is certain to get worse. So some people argue, why don't you just focus on what is certain rather than on risks? But my opinion is, say, if you have, so not you, but say somebody who is a heavy smoker, has high blood pressure and goes to the doctor should tell them, okay, if you keep smoking, your blood pressure will get even higher. But the doctor should also tell them that there is a risk that you get a stroke, even if that's not certain. I think it's a duty of the doctor to talk about the risks, and it is the duty of climate scientists to also explain the risks, even of things that are not certain to happen. But if they would happen, they would be a massive disaster.
Definitely. And to kind of take that medical analogy further, I almost feel like prevention is the best medicine in many ways.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we've discussed the problem here, but what about the solutions? What can be done to prevent this change from happening, or at least slow it down? And who's most responsible, and who needs to take action?
Well, the thing is that we can't do anything specifically about the AMOC except minimizing further global warming. So the conclusion is nothing else but sticking to the Paris Climate Agreement, which all countries committed to trying to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and definitely to well below 2 degrees Celsius. And we are now already at 1.3 to 1.4, as just the report by the World Meteorological Organization has stated. And so basically the conclusion is just to reaffirm what we should be doing anyway, even for those to avoid those certain impacts of climate change.
Absolutely. And I think as a climate campaigner who works in the transition away from fossil fuels, trying to transition to a green and just transition for me is a huge part of what I think is a solution to all of these climate issues. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for joining us today for this first CCAG climate conversation. This conversation has been eye-opening and sobering, to say the least, and I have certainly learned a lot about the AMOC, why it's important, the implications of it changing, and the implications of how that would impact us and wider society. We know that these conversations can be hard, but no change in society will come about unless we face the facts. And our anxieties and fears, while valid, can serve as a reminder for what's at stake, and we must find ways to harness their power. With a greater understanding of the issues at hand, we will be better prepared to advocate for climate justice, stand against the profiteering from big oil and gas, and raise our voices to demand change, whether that be through speaking to leaders, institutions, industries, and everyday people. We have a duty to advocate for the future of humanity and the planet, and especially those most vulnerable. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, goodbye.